there. Thanks so much for tuning into our LDV Capital series, The Women Leading Visual Tech. I'm Abby. I'm with LDV Capital. We invest in people building visual technology businesses. We thrive on collaborating with deep technical teams that leverage computer vision, machine learning, and artificial intelligence in order to analyze visual data. The Women Leading Visual Tech series is focused on promoting some of the top ladies whose work in visual technologies are revolutionizing business and society. In this interview, I had the pleasure of chatting with Esther Dyson. Esther is an investor, journalist, author, businesswoman, commentator, and philanthropist. She's a leading angel investor focused on healthcare, open government, digital technology, biotechnology, logistics, and outer space. Currently, she's the full-time executive founder of Wellville, a 10-year project that ends in 2024 to show the long-term value in both equity and resilience of investing in health for all. She's a board member of Yandex, and she was an early investor in notable startups such as 23andMe, which she was a former board member of, Evernote, which she was also a former board member of, Flickr, Mashery, MedStory, Omada Health, and Square. Overall, she's fascinated by new business models, new technologies, and new markets. From October 2008 until March of 2009, she lived in Star City outside of Moscow, Russia, training as a backup cosmonaut. Apart from this brief sabbatical, she is an active board member for a variety of startups. She's got a BA in economics from Harvard and was the founding chairman of ICANN from 1998 until 2000. In addition, she wrote the best-selling, widely translated book, Release 2.0, A Design for Living in the Digital Age. I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Esther just as much as I did. Give it a listen and let us know what you think. Thanks. Esther, thank you so much for joining me today to chat all about visual technologies and investing.
I'm delighted to be here with my own beautiful visual background.
Yeah, I know, with a virtual background. Tell me a little bit about it. What does it represent to you?
I found it online on Twitter. I think it's called the coronavirus commute. You can see it. And, you know, I thought I would use it for a while and then replace it with something better, but I never found anything better. I love it. I'm a big user of mass transit. I'm a New Yorker. I don't drive a car. Yeah. And so it's perfect for me.
How the subway map translates to your apartment, essentially.
My apartment isn't as big as, like, well, we have a laundry downstairs, but it's,
yeah.
I took what I found.
That's great.
But I love it.
Well, you have a variety of different roles that you've played throughout your career. Everything from investor to cosmonaut in your background. So for people who are just tuning in, how would you describe what you do in one line?
I never take a job for which I'm already qualified. Mm-hmm. And I do things because I think I'll learn something and also ideally produce something of value. So I was a really good student in high school because I wanted to get out. And I got to college 2 years early. Then in college, I had a wonderful time, wrote for the Harvard Crimson, never went to class, and it was great. And I learned how to be a real teenager. And then I really started my education about 2 years after I finished college, when I got a job as a fact checker for Forbes magazine. Yeah. And, you know, if you're going to check facts, you really need to know your stuff. So that was amazing. That I majored in economics and never learned much, but I learned a lot about business at Forbes. Then I was on Wall Street for 5 years. Then for 25 years, with amazing timing, I had a newsletter and a conference that kind of covered the emergence of the personal computer. And we had a conference called PC Forum, Personal Computer Forum, that ended up 25 years later being called the Platforms for Communication Forum. Still PC Forum, but about the internet and social networks and so forth. We had, you know, in the beginning we had Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, and by the end we had Reid Hoffman and Mark Zuckerberg and Larry Page as speakers. Then sold the business, became an angel investor, got more and more interested in healthcare, took 6 months off to train as a cosmonaut in 2008, 2009. And then really started leaning in on the healthcare side and began to ask the fundamental question, which is, why are we spending so much money fixing things with people who shouldn't have been sick in the first place.
Yeah.
So in 2014, I started something called Wellville, which is a 10-year project to basically produce resilience and equity in 5 small communities around the US. And it's kind of a model of what we should do after COVID-19. Like, let's actually invest in children and health and resilience and equity.
Yep.
So that the next time something bad happens, it doesn't crumble our society as badly as it is doing right now.
For sure. I mean, I think resilience is like that key word, right?
Yes.
Because what we've realized, I think more than ever with this pandemic, is that, we are not resilient. If so many businesses and opportunities can just totally crumble from a month of shutdown. What kind of brilliance have we built into those businesses, or resilience have we built into those businesses?
Or the people undergoing them. I mean, the after effect on the post-trauma stress, I think, is going to be one of the worst aspects of all of this. And yeah, everything we can do now to give children a more secure present so that they have a more resilient future is going to be key to the future.
That's great. So what really inspired you to go down this path? Was there like a single moment that you remember in your life where you're like, all right, this internet thing is going to be huge, or like these personal computers are really going to change things?
I was thinking about health, but it was curiosity. I mean, the thing I hated about college was it was basically kind of learning stuff and repeating it. And once I started being a reporter, my job was to find out new stuff. And that was fun.
Yeah.
So, the internet, the personal computer, I mean, it started with word processors. And yeah, when I was working at Forbes, I had a typewriter. That intrigued me. So I went to places where I could learn more about it. That's why I joined the board of 23andMe. And it's why I did cosmonaut training in Russia. In each case, it was, I think this is really interesting. And I know if I go there or do this or join this board, then I'll become an expert. I also went to Russia for the first time in 1989 for sort of the same reason. And, then, I mean, these were all really fascinating things that intrigued me. But the one where I felt there was kind of a moral dimension was this health issue.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we failing to bring up the next generation in a way that will guarantee them a much better future?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think, if I understand correctly, I looked at Wellville, and it seems like in the 5 different communities that you guys selected to operate in and work with, you actually selected different things to work on in those communities, different focus areas. So they seem like they're tailored specifically to those communities, more so than just being a blanket statement about like, this is how we're going to come in and improve your health.
Well, it was very much, I mean, first of all, we selected them, but it wasn't, here's a nice white lady from New York and she's going to give you some tech to do things. It was very different. We put out a call for applications. And the first thing I did, having learned from Silicon Valley how some people destroy the things they love, I hired a CEO, and my CEO came from Sigma. He knew about public health. He was, sort of understood the institutions that we were going to be dealing with. So together we put out this call for applications. You had to be a community, ultimately under 200,000 people. You had to have some kind of cross-sector collaborative that was applying, and you had to be self-contained. The idea was we weren't going to go in and work on a subset of the population.
Yeah.
We were going to help the whole community to become healthier for all its members, which meant equity. In other words, don't just make the rich people healthier and then say you've increased the average, but bring the bottom half up. Yeah. So 42 communities applied, to our great amazement.
Wow.
We read, and this was not just send us a letter, it was quite a detailed application. So we read them all and picked 10 of the communities to visit. And then what we were looking for was not, quote, the 10 best.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the very best one we did not select because they were too good, and we didn't, we wanted to make a difference. We didn't want just to say, oh, this one's great. We picked them.
Yep.
And we wanted all kinds of diversity in sort of geography and the institutions within the populations and so forth. So we got 5 very different places. And then in terms of what's going on in each community, again, we're not coming in with programs for them. I mean, they all have some notion of what they want to fix. And our job is to coach the ones that are going to be effective and even more effective with coaching. So in each community, we're not necessarily working, I mean, there's turnover among people, there's even turnover among organizations, but what we're trying to do, in terms of the people in the community, we want to increase equity. But in terms of the institutions, we want to help the best ones become better and grow and collaborate, because that's where you get the real leverage. Mm-hmm. And so it varies from community to community, the kinds of organizations we're working with and the kinds of problems they're addressing. But they're all, in one form or another, offshoots of poverty and racism and, just inadequate services to people, to children, and so forth.
Well, and then, just kind of tying that to health, right? It seems like health in your mind is a much more holistic version of it than just what we consider to be like medical care.
Yes.
Here is that there's so many other things that add to well-being.
So you asked me, was there kind of an origin story?
Yeah.
And the one for Wellville goes back to this guy, Charlie Silver, who had a website called Real Age that I wrote about for my newsletter. Do you know that? You answer questions less about your health care and more about, do you have a dog? Do you have a partner? Do you eat right? Do you sleep well? And it tells you, quote, your real age versus your actual age. And he ended up selling that to Hearst, which then sold it to ShareCare. But what was really interesting about Charlie was who he sold his previous company to. And that was Jiffy Lube.
Interesting.
The oil change people. And it's like, oh, yes, we like what we do with our cars, we should do it with ourselves. And yes, like keep the thing in good running condition. It's an investment. And to me, that's always sort of been the metaphor, invest in your health, don't rent it.
Yeah. Interesting. So it seems like there's like a major convergence for you between the science and the physics that you grew up around and the tech and internet world that you embarked onto first in your career.
And then it all came back.
Yeah, and it seems like you're drawing a lot of lessons between the two in order to help, the health side of things. You're using the lessons that you've learned from your investing side of things. Can you talk a little bit more about this idea that you had that people, CEOs kill what they love? Do you have any like example or story that you think about in your mind?
I mean, one of the ones that most intrigues me is Elon Musk. Because there are 2 Elon Musks. There's the SpaceX Elon Musk, who has Gwynne Shotwell running his company.
Yeah.
And it's well run. It's it's exciting. It's doing risky stuff, but it's fundamentally an organization that works, and it's sensible and it's successful. And then there's the Elon Musk at Tesla, where he runs it himself. And, he's continually doing crazy things and putting the entire operation at risk because he doesn't have someone there telling, dude, just sit in your chair and be quiet. Or, I don't know what it is, and it's so important to have somebody who will tell me as the founder, Esther, that's a dumb idea.
Yep.
The very first thing our CEO said to me about Wellville was originally called Hiccup, as in Health Initiative Coordinating Council Up. And I was on the board of Meetup. I thought Hiccup was really clever, and it was really clever. But it was also a pretty terrible name for a health thing. And he told me that, and I said, okay, come up with something better, and he did.
Yeah.
So it's that good companies are run by teams, and good founders want the company to succeed, even if it means they shouldn't be running it. And at Adventure, I also had a CEO who, again, would tell me if I was being obnoxious or foolish or, and that's good. But the amazing thing is, at Adventure, my CEO, Daphne, it's a long story. I dropped my computer in Russia. The disk drive was broken. I brought it back, and she and the other people there sent it out to be fixed, and it took a few days. And Daphne came up to me and said, Esther, I don't really know how to say this, but we're trying to get your computer fixed as fast as we can, but just like you're behaving as if we were the problem. And this was in a company of 5 people, and she was scared to tell me the truth.
Yeah.
And I realized, imagine what it's like if you're Elon Musk or Larry Page or Donald Trump or any of these people won't tell you no.
Yeah.
And it's, you look at the world around you and you see all these important people making bad decisions because no one dares to tell them the truth. And it's really scary.
Yeah, the emperor has no clothes kind of scenario ends up a lot. And I probably would attribute a lot of that to you too, because I think that in a lot of ways, it's not just about the willingness of other people to bring things up or to be that check and balance upon you, but also the willingness of you to listen. Which could be a factor. Are these things that you look at now when you're looking at an investment in an early stage team and you're saying, all right, what is going to help me build conviction in them? Is this a major filtering point for you?
Totally. One of the worst things you can say if you want me to invest is, I've always wanted to be CEO, or I want to be a billionaire. That is not the right motivation. It's, I've always wanted to solve this problem. I think I have the solution. If the solution turns out to be wrong, we'll pivot. If I turn out not to be a good CEO, we'll bring in a good CEO to make this thing work.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to hear. And it's why I didn't invest in Ubiome, among other things, which ended up being
But you did invest in a company, Ezra, that we're actually co-investors in, that's using MRI in order to detect 13 different cancers in women and 11 in men. Can you give an example of how you found conviction for Ezra and Emmy and Diego, the co-founders of Ezra?
So I knew Emmy from his previous company, which I was a small investor in, Brainient, which it was video advertising. And I am not a big fan of advertising or video. I was on the board of WPP, and again, I'm interested in it intellectually, but I really liked Emmy. And he sold Brainient, and then I was looking for something new to do, and I was friends, so I kind of watched that, and he decided he wanted to do AI for cancer detection, and he knew nothing about it, which was perfect because he was willing to learn. And watching him learn, find people who knew more than he did, look for radiologists, that was what made me fall in love with him and the company. That precisely because he knew nothing, he was extremely open to learning and finding the best people and being humble and so forth. And I'm working in the Ezra office.
The same things on that one, and it's got to be nice to be able to, when, it's I guess it's kind of the holy grail for us when we find something that we believe in so strongly from a value perspective, right? Preventative healthcare, right? So being able to screen yourself before you actually have cancer to understand when you've got the earliest signs of it, especially if you're carrying a gene like the BRCA gene or something like this, right? And then being able to marry that with such a fantastic founding team of people, who are working hard and listening and are, iterative in nature and collaborative in nature, with all the people that they surround themselves with.
So there's one other cool thing. I liked it, but the original focus was prostate cancer because that's not paid for by insurance, and we're getting more and more formalized and recognized by the FDA and so forth. But originally it kind of was, well, we'll get all these rich guys on the Upper East Side because they can pay and blah blah blah. And we did, but we also got truckers from Staten Island and
my dad.
Yeah. We got a lot of men who simply weren't part of the regular healthcare system. And there's another company, same thing, it's called Higgy. Men, first of all, they don't want to pay for healthcare. They might have a high deductible. And they don't really want to go into a doctor and have the nurse look at them and say, yeah, I can tell you're pre-diabetic, you're fat, and you should stop smoking. It's like, lady, I know that, leave me alone. But then something actually turns up and they need help. And Ezra is actually a cost-effective solution in that way versus eating up your deductible. So we're still not what I would consider my core, which is underserved populations. But we're not just helping the idle rich. And I like that. And I like the notion of taking a baseline. As you can imagine, I've now done the full body scan and so forth. And 3 years from now, if there's a lump or something, you can see, well, have you had this lump for 5 years already and nothing's happening, or is it growing fast? And you want a timeline.
Absolutely. And I think that if I think about the reason my dad went and did it is, he got an elevated PSA level from the test, and the entire part about the prostate exam, in starting there, is because the only other option was biopsy. And as a man who's retired and doesn't want to pay a ton for healthcare because he thinks of himself as incredibly healthy, he's got terrible coverage. And so it ended up being the cost-effective solution for him, and a less painful solution for him to be able to go in and get a scan than it would have been to go in for biopsy. And it turned out, that he didn't actually need biopsy, luckily, but it's one way of, another lesson that we think is really important from this is starting with something really specific, right? And then expanding your offerings in order to reach that larger audience or that larger goal that you have vision for your company.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Also, it's worth noting that biopsies give a lot of false positives, like your dad. Sorry, the PSA gives a lot of false positives, like your dad's, and then the biopsy can often give you a false negative because unless you hit the right part of the prostate, you just miss it. So it's a real, again, it's a problem with our healthcare system. The MRI is a much better way to do it, and it should be paid for by insurance. And with luck, Ezra can help prove that.
Exactly. And at least now you can get it covered by your HSA, in case anybody's interested.
Yeah.
So many of the companies like Ezra that you're investing in, whether they're healthcare or otherwise, are leveraging pretty unique visual technologies in order to succeed. One of the ones that, you've taken such a prominent role with is 23andMe. And we think of 23andMe as being powered by visual technologies because it uses next generation sequencing, which is a fluorescence imaging technology, in order to understand the genetic sequencing of an individual. right? And so what the Human Genome Project took something like 20 years and over $1 billion in order to sequence a human genome. And now 23andMe can do it for you in like, what, I think 2 weeks, once you send in your samples?
It's slightly more complicated than that, but
Yeah.
yes. And I just discovered last week that I have the protective Neanderthal gene against having an overreaction to COVID-19. It's on chromosome 3, and you know, it's cool.
It is
and
cool.
honestly, over time, increasingly useful. I mean, genetics, there's a difference between knowing what causes something and knowing how to fix it.
Yep.
But knowing what causes it is definitely a good step in the right direction.
For sure. And it was actually, you know, I saw that on your Twitter that you put it up and you're like, okay, so like I've got the Neanderthal gene, like what does this mean? Right. And I think that it opens up a lot of questions about what's the next step for all of this genetics stuff, right? So now we can get a readout, but what does it actually mean, or how does it change our behavior in the long run?
So part of it, I mean, is using visualization to explain what's going on. One I love that we do not use at 23andMe, but I've used in many talks is, you know, if people say, oh, you know, I don't really want to know, it's too scary. And there's sort of in the Middle Ages, there was this meme, I guess, you know, like if you looked in a mirror, you would see the devil behind you, because people didn't have mirrors. I mean, every once in a while you might look in a pond that was very still and see you, but it was just like, it was sort of scary and creepy to see your own face. I mean, imagine, the devil behind you. So now people have the same feeling about their genome, equally without their rational reason, that it's scary. I mean, first of all, it shows you risk. It doesn't show you a diagnosis or an outcome and so forth. But, you know, I have this theory that inside people's heads, when they look at their genome, they just add everything up, you know, like I've got this risk and that risk, and they have this kind of 400% chance of dying in their head if they actually examined it. And I love to tell people that by going into space, you can reduce your risk of dying of breast cancer. And do you know how?
From my understanding, it deactivates an aspect of your genome. Is that correct? No?
It basically, your risk is prorated. If you're 25% more likely to die by going into space of something that happens in space, then your risk of dying of breast cancer is reduced by 25%.
Okay.
You know,
so no activation necessary.
No, nothing fancy. And so what I tell people is, imagine this pie chart of how you're going to die. And it takes out the subtleties of dying of and dying with and so forth. But anyway, you know, it's like 100%. And there's this little sliver of blue, which is that, you know, for some reason you don't die. But otherwise, you know, like your chances of dying are basically 100%. And everything you hear about, you know, you've got to fit into this chart. It's not going to make your chances of dying increase.
Yeah.
And it sort of, it makes it more finite. And to me, that's one of the most important visualizations around genetics. You know, no matter what risk you have, your ultimate risk of dying is still just 100%. It's not going to increase. And, you know, the timing of it may change, blah, 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 but that's my favorite visualization. Then there are ones that make you understand, you know, if you take a big slice out for dying in space, the other bits all get contracted.
Yeah. We actually had a conversation the other day with the women in my family, because it turns out that my grandma had some type of gene that is basically it starts to degrade your nerves down in your legs, and so it leads to you being unable to walk later in life. And you know, half of the women who are in my family are like, yes, I definitely want to go get sequenced to see if I have this risk factor. right? Or if it's even there, because we don't know if it's activated or not. We just know that it's
Yeah.
there. And the other half are like, I don't want to know. Like, there's no reason for me to know. I'm either going to have it or I'm not. And so it was a really interesting discussion between us about, should we go or should we not go, and what's the benefit in knowing versus not. And there's still, so many conversation points or controversies about what those genes actually mean, the expression of them, right? Like, I was, as I told you before, I was reading an Edge piece on your father, the Remembering Freeman Dyson one, which is really great. And it actually made me giggle to see such two brilliant thinkers engaging in such strong controversy over genetics, over email, no less. But putting out like this big question is, so now we're able to read our genes thanks to NGS tech like 23andMe, but what does it actually mean for us in our lives, and that 100% rate of death that we're all inevitably facing? It's really interesting, and such a direction that the industry is going at the moment to make more sense of it.
Yeah. So what did the women in your family ultimately decide? Was it half and half?
It was half and half. There was no consensus reached at that point in time, just because everybody has their own desires about how they want to live their life, and the things that they want to know are coming and not coming, and how they want to plan for it. I suppose.
So what about you?
I would rather know, because I would like to make sure that my family is prepared for it, or I put in place the things that can make it easier for me to live longer at home, or spend more time with my kids, and do as much preventative work on it as I can if I seem to have the gene, or the gene seems to be expressing itself once I hit 40.
And do you, or?
I don't know yet. We have got to go get sequenced.
Oh, okay. Because I have an ApoE4 for Alzheimer's.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, in the end, it means stay as healthy as you can, which I've been doing anyway, and it hasn't changed my life much. I mean, it's different from something that is, my risk went from something like 7% to 13% or something. It's still, within kind of a couple of standard deviations of 10. But, it's like it's not a death sentence, it's a risk. And you can do so much more. I mean, this goes back to all the Wellville stuff. It's really not your genes, it's your behavior and the circumstances in which you grow up that have
the interactions between the two.
Yeah.
100%. And so, thinking about these kinds of things from a health perspective, and also, a bunch of other visual tech companies that you've invested in, like Flickr, or, we think of WPP as being powered by visual technologies. Facebook is being powered by visual technologies. Do you have any hypotheses at the moment where the world is going in terms of visual content?
Well, I mean, my parents are scientists. I love graphs and charts, and I don't know if you know Edward Tufte, the visual display of quantitative information. It drives me crazy when I see a graph that doesn't have 0 at the bottom and stuff like that. I think we're getting better at explaining stuff visually and with charts. So I have 5 different sleep monitors I'm using right now.
Wow.
And I've actually got to deal with somebody I've got an additional electrostimulation device I use at night, and I've given him the password to my 5 sleep devices and said, look, you can have all my data. I just want you to put them into a single graph so that I can see, because they sort of all agree, yeah, you slept good or you slept bad. They don't really agree on any of the details.
Really?
And I would love to see them all on the same chart.
Yeah.
But we need so much standardization. And as you get big data and AI, it's useless unless you can see. I mean, the AI can figure stuff out, but you really want to be able to see the impact. I mean, if I ran the world, I would give every second grader a continuous glucose monitor so they could see the impact of the food they eat and their, how much they exercise and so forth, and their sleep probably on their metabolism. And being able to see it, like, oh, I ate the banana and look, it went up, or I didn't have any lunch and this is what happened, and so forth. It makes it clear. And some people are more or less visual, but in the end, a good chart will always explain something that's quantitative better than just a bunch of words.
For sure. And with the amount of data that we're collecting, whether that's from like the 5 sleep monitors, or if that's your location data and where you go every day and who you come into contact with, right? The visualization of it in order to help us understand what's happening on the back end from a machine learning AI perspective is imperative. We were talking to a company the other day who's doing a lot of work in the agricultural space. And they're looking at, meat packing plants and and the spatial distancing from all the different COVID outbreaks, and what's the interactive nature between the two. And the person who did it ended up saying, that was our aha moment. The moment that we took all this data and we put it on a map and we could see it is the moment that it starts to really make sense of what we need to be able to do to control things like coronavirus outbreaks and meatpacking, which is so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think I love looking at all these different visualizations. I mean, one of the very few good impacts of COVID-19 has been a lot more charts and graphic artists and maps, and just people are really getting much better at using data and showing timelines and understanding, the lags. First you get the cases, then you get the deaths, then you get the herd immunity, we hope, and it's not very clear. But, seeing how something will spread, seeing, these cluster outbreaks, and the data don't lie, but they also don't tell a story until you see them in a visualization like that.
Very, very true. So, coming down, I know that we're getting to time now, and I don't want to run too far over. But if you had a recommendation for women who are starting out investing right now, what would you tell them? Like, when is the right time to start investing?
It's sort of like, when is the right time to go to college? When is the right time to stop learning and start earning? It varies. I mean, if you're talking about angel investing, it's very much when you have enough money to diversify. Because, I mean, fundamentally, angel investing is an educational activity. And you learn a ton by, for example, making 10 investments. And if you're lucky, your education will be paid for by 1 or 2 of those investments. And you'll learn a ton from the 8 ones that failed. If you're unlucky, all 10 will fail. But if all 10 work out, you probably won't learn much because you won't understand what can go wrong.
More lessons from the losses than from the wins.
Yeah. And the losses are, they're mistakes in some sense, but they are the cost that you pay for the learning, and they're the cost you pay for the return on the 1 or 2 that actually work. And if you don't have the ability to do 10 or more, your chances of losing it all are quite high. So, it doesn't mean just spray the money around. It means still, pick ones. I mean, there's not 20 of them, but I have quite a few investments where the first one failed, and I invested in the person the second time around and it worked. With Emmy, at Ezra, they both worked. But you can learn a lot from your first failed investment, both as an investor or as a CEO. But there are ones where, they did not come up with another idea or concept, but I don't regret the first investment because I believed in what they were doing. I believed in the people. They're still friends. You know, invest in things you love, and then you'll get the education.
You want to learn about too, right?
Yeah.
That's great. What are there any kinds of visual tech companies or companies in general at the moment that get you really excited and that you're looking to invest in right now?
Right now, the ones I'm most focused on are mental health, telehealth. I mean, I do a bunch of weird things. I'm in a couple of logistics companies. I'm a big fan of insurance because, you know, incentives and risk and so forth. And to understand those things, good visualizations help. I'm an investor in Open Water, which is, you know, basically not visualization, but actual, you know, scanning
visual data
at very, very high precision. And I love maps. In fact, one of the companies I'm investing right now is a trucking insurance company where the founder's first company was a map company.
Yeah. So. Oh, interesting. Yeah, you know, we've looked at a variety of those spaces. So like, for instance, telehealth, we wrote a report a couple of years ago that we projected that by 2024, the number of virtual visits would actually overcome the number of physical visits that you pay to a doctor. And we've already surpassed that within this pandemic, right? And so we think that that's going to continue to go up as well. We totally agree with you on it. Telehealth is a huge thing at the moment. And then we've looked at the logistics space too, and with everything that's happening around automation, right? And
well, automation, but also, you know, just the whole notion of slack versus efficiency and dynamic scheduling, dynamic pricing, the impact of 3D printing, you know, not on mass production, but on kind of short-term, just-in-time inventory management, stuff like that. That's all fascinating.
Very cool. All right, so last question for you that I always wrap up with everyone with. If computers didn't exist, what would your career choice have been?
Space travel.
You would have been a cosmonaut, or you would have been an astronaut all the way?
Though actually, my career goal in college was to be Moscow bureau chief of the New York Times, and never got around to it. Had more interesting things to do, but you never know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I worked in Moscow for a while, so we can compare notes on what that's like afterwards.
What were you doing?
I was actually on the Alpha Fellowship program, which sponsors Americans and Brits to go over to Russia and to work in an industry. So I was working for the Boston Consulting Group over there. And I was looking at, in particular, the rise of commerce in wake of Russia's accession to the World Trade Organization, where I'd been working prior to BCG. But,
interesting.
Yeah, it was a very exciting time, and things have changed a lot these days.
Oh man, yeah. I'm in the middle of reading this book called Putin's People.
Yeah, so, interesting.
Anyway, good. Well,
it's been a fantastic chatting with you. We really appreciate
you
taking the time and sharing your insights and guidance on everything from investing to the holistic view of healthcare and how we can be improving things around the globe, hopefully, for everybody who lives. I really appreciate you taking that time to chat, and we'll follow up some more.